title that I gave myself. And since my boss doesn't really know what I do, it doesn't matter what that title is. So it's pretty exciting. I'll tell you, my background is actually I have a degree in wildlife and I have a degree in range. So coming into emerging technologies is a fluke. But it's kind of a good thing because I actually study this from the point of how does this influence natural resource literacy? How can we use technologies to further outreach and education for natural resources? And that's really the area that I concentrate on. So when I spend all day on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn, it's completely professional. And it is absolutely so that I can enhance your learning of how to do this in the real world. So when you read this title, you either read it like this: why does social media have to change everything? Or why does social media have to change everything? And so how many of you read it very whiny? Like, oh my gosh, she's going to talk about, this is what has happened to our society, right? So how many of you honestly feel this way? It's okay, just fess up, right? Because it's that thing out there that's creating us right back into position number one. And I would say that is how a lot of people feel, because a lot of people see this social media, this mediascape is really what it is, in changing the way our social environment works. It's taking people away from face-to-face meetings and giving them face-to-face meetings with their computer monitor. Or actually, more realistically, face-to-face meetings with things of this nature, this size. And that's how a lot of people feel about social media. And so when we think about how to do that, it's social media, when we think, oh, could I use this for educational programming? I mean, how do I do that? It's that thing over here. It's something. It's not necessarily what we think of as integrated highly into our society. But I have to tell you that social media in itself is highly integrated into our society. You know the numbers. You know there are 425 billion people who use Facebook. You know there are 135 million users of Google. I don't have to show you the numbers because you see them every single day. That still probably doesn't convince a lot of us that this thing is not something over here that'll just kind of fade out and something else will take its place. This is a complete change. What we're seeing is a complete change in pretty much the way that human history has in transferring information. And it's not something that's so different than we've seen in the past. It's just the rate at which we're seeing it is much quicker than we've ever seen in the past. There is this is a professor, Michael Wesch, who is great at understanding how information and technologies, and it doesn't matter what kind, it could be hammers, it could be different kinds of technologies, how they influence human societies. And he gave a great talk to the Library of Congress about how social media and the internet in particular is influencing our rapid transfer of information. And if you are at all, went through the education system, you know that information transfer really pushes innovation. So when you see information transfer, what you see following is innovation. And so that's really what he talks about. And instead of putting it on a timeline, I thought it was very meaningful the way he talked about it. He put it on a clock. And he said, if you took the history of mankind and you put it on a clock, this is why we are all feeling a little bit odd about what's going on right now. It took us about 20 minutes to get to a big innovation in information transfer, and that was writing. So prior to that, we have oral, right? We have people transferring information orally. And of course, when the wheel is invented, that creates a better way to transfer information. But writing was a huge innovation in information transfer. Things that had been orally presented now were written and documented, and we see a huge increase in things like written law, which changed society greatly. It was no longer word of mouth, it's storytelling. Now you have pieces of paper that things are written down on. You can have disputes, you can have arguments, you can have legal papers, all those things. Huge change in humans, huge change in innovation that happened when writing occurred. It took us roughly between 7 and 8 o'clock to come up with the next huge innovation, which was a printing press. There are, of course, a lot of things in between here, but these are historically probably some pretty important areas. So about this time, printing presses. That changed the way we were able to transfer information, and information became available to more people. You know, the Gutenberg Bible, that is the classic example that made a religion for every man, right? It also made it so that you could print small things. It incited revolutions. All kinds of things happened with the printing press. So after that, things started happening much more rapidly, right? So after that, we've got innovations like the telegraph. You could transfer information through a wire. You didn't even have to be there in person. That is a huge innovation. And then shortly after, we get telephone, radio, TV. The way things are happening, the way information transfer is greatly speeding up. Our advantage we have is we are able to transfer information faster. The disadvantage we have is we have less time to get used to that information transfer. It's transferring, it's changing, it's forcing us to change really rapidly. And now he explains that our actual changes in information transfer are no longer happening in these 20-minute intervals, these 10-minute intervals, these 5-minute intervals. We are actually happening like if you were to measure that in seconds. Okay? The things that are happening right now are happening in seconds. So that leads to a huge amount of confusion for us because we have very little time to measure the impact of this information transfer on actual things that are going on. So we can't measure the impact of what happens when you have a global network of doctors working on the same research project. It's almost instantaneous. Okay, they come up with innovation in months, what used to take years, it used to take decades. All of these things are really hard for us to keep up with. So of course it creates this like just total, closing up. How do I even do this? Is it worth any time to invest in this? And how does my work and business keep up? Okay, what do I choose? What do I do? And so in a lot of cases we say, it's overwhelming. I'm just going to go back to the way I was. What we don't realize that much because we cannot see it. It's happening so fast. We have very little time to look at the impact. Is the entire mediascape that we have grown up in is changing. And that has not happened prior to that. TV and radio are the closest generations to that. But how many, when you look back on your lifetime, between now and I'm 40, I have seen transformations of TV, the internet, different things, of cellular. All these things have happened in 40 years' time. I mean, it used to take 200 years, okay? So I don't even have a handle on how to do that and how to keep up. And so I tend to say that a lot of times when people say, social media, it's just a waste of time, is that you don't understand that it is an entire change in the way information is transferred. If anyone in this room, let me ask you a question, how many of you are involved in your job in transferring information to the public, to your colleagues? Raise your hand. Okay, every single person in this room raise their hand. You are involved in transferring information. And the question is, you have to understand social media to understand how that's going to happen today. It doesn't mean that you have to be a personal user of it, but you must understand how it is happening because it is the same as understanding how it happened in print, or how it happened in radio, or how it happened in TV, or how it happens in publications, or how it happened in email. You can't ignore it because you don't like it, but you have to understand that this is how people are giving and receiving information and how to find your role in that. Okay? So why does it have such an impact on information discovery? It is a huge change in how people receive information. How many of you knew that we are not in the first generation of the web? We don't hear a lot about that unless you're in a highly technological area. But web, we're actually in this version of Web 3.0. Some will argue we're moving to Web 4.0. But if you ever wanted to look at how the web has changed our lives, you can think about it as this. When websites first came out, they were like a business card. They were very static. You went there, you found out information. Most of the time, you went and found out information like how to call that person. You didn't have an email, right? So that was there. Web 2.0 is a total change in the web. This is where users have control to generate content. This is where people started blogging. People started writing their own newspapers. And people started getting their own reports. The Drudge Report, that's a huge, huge, you study that just from a technological standpoint. You can put the Drudge Report next to Headline News or CNN or the Wall Street Journal in terms of users. These are people who are generating their own content. Huge change in the way the world worked because you no longer had somebody who filtered your information on a daily basis. Prior to this, who filtered your information? People at the TV station, people and news editors, magazine editors. You received information as a consumer in a very small pipe. Okay, Web 2.0 opened that up. How many of you remember all the times where the web, where people reported things, atrocities that happened that came out of other countries, or even our own country? Okay, that's user-generated content. It changed definitely the mediascape in which we'd operated. It also made it much harder for entities to control information, good or bad, coming out of organizations, because there's always people who leak something. The truth always comes out. So this is a change in how we got information. And Web 3.0 is really what we're in now. We're seeing a simulation. We're seeing that the web is starting to be smarter. It knows that when you are interested in clicking on plants, you might be interested in botany. It's beginning to make assumptions about you according to what you do on the web, maybe according to what social networks you belong to. It's trying to customize your web experience to the things you like. This means a lot to people who transfer information, because it means that we have to do a really good job, if you're an information provider, in connecting the dots. Okay, so if I go to LCRA's website, I need to also make sure that in some way that experience leads the user to TCEQ or EPA if we're talking about watersheds. That's where the web is headed, and that's our challenge. Is we've got to, the string of information is beginning to actually connect like the web. If you ever have just spare time and you want to do something fun, go to this website, the Wayback Machine. It's hysterical. You can look up your website or anybody's website from the very beginning and see what it looked like, and it's really fun to look at. You can look at even companies like Pepsi or Coke or Nike and see, hey, when they came out in 92 with their first website, what is it like? We're in 2013, what is it like now? Huge change, right? Look at your agency's ones, so funny. And then you can publish that on your social networks if you want to. So this is really about how social networking impacts information sharing. And if you just type Wayback Machine, if you Google it, then it'll come up first. But it's very interesting to look at. Okay, so social networking. Do you know how it impacts information sharing? A lot of us think, well, it just impacted the way people use the web. But that's not actually true. It actually impacted the way in which people invested in this technology. I do not have to tell you probably that most of the people in the world are on the internet in some way, shape, or form. These are the US statistics. If you had any question about are people online, this document, this is 2011, the 2012 statistics aren't out. Poor people, rich people, urban people, people without education, old people, young people. If you have any question about whether your constituent is in this group, these numbers should tell you they're on the web, right? How many people use the word, can Google it like it's a verb? Okay, Google's a product like Kleenex. Okay, but we use it like a verb. As a matter of fact, this morning you said, please Google this, right? So that's in our vernacular right now. So going to the internet is like a second nature to us. So when people have information, this is what we used to do. And what most of us still do today. We spend a lot of time and energy building our websites saying, oh, you know, people will find us. Somehow they'll find us. And so we're going to build everything that's going to tell you, go there and you're going to find information about this. You want to be the definitive source, and that is how we all want to be as an agency. The definitive source. Okay? So we spend a lot of time doing that. Unfortunately, because the mediascape has changed, you know what? Your user has a choice about definitive sources, and they are going to Google first. They're going to visually look through the Google, and they'll see .edu, .org, blah, blah, and they're going to make some choices. And even when they go there to find everything about this, they're not going to trust you. They're going to go back to Google, and they're going to validate that with other sources. So it's a very different way in which we want to share information. This is what a user wants. They want that information to land in their lap. When they Google something, when they get on their social networks, they want that information to come to them. They want you to be interested in what they're interested in, not the other way around. So that changes how we think about information sharing. If you're going to be the popular kid on the block, you have to realize that these networks are going to help you get there. And what you invest in them and the way you make your information available to them, I don't care if you ever have a Facebook account. You have to understand how Facebook looks at you and your pages, your information. You have to understand that because they're going to be the ones that help you get to the top of that Google list. Very hard right now, okay? So if you need even more evidence, let me ask you this. How many people in this group are seeing an increase in the number of contact hours in these things, in your personal meeting? How many of you are seeing a 200% jump in the number of people who attend your face-to-face meetings? Because I want to go there. I want to know your secret. Okay? How many about, is it getting cheaper to publish things? Is it getting cheaper to put ads in magazines? It is not. Okay? So we have to realize that. If you need even more evidence, this is the way people are using the internet. Of course, I don't even have to tell you these numbers, but 4 billion searches a day. 4 billion searches a day. So if you say to yourself, well, I'm going to have most of my things in email. I'm going to have most of my things on my website. You've got to make sure that you're going to be found. And being found used to happen in a very different way than it does now. And most people have no idea, or how many people, let me ask you, how many people know that in 2011 we had a major shift in how search engines looked at information? A few, I see a few kind of like hesitantly raising their hands. The major shift in SEO, that's search engine optimization, is due to this chart. And of course, you do not have that on your if I was smart, I might give that to you, but it's online. You can Google this. This is the periodic table of SEO ranking factors. And this is what it tells us. Okay, here is traditionally how we used to rank pages. On-page SEO. We put these tags in the metadata. We put different things in the HTML code. We put all this stuff, and we told our people where we program our websites that you need to pay attention to this on-page SEO because we want to be at the top of the Google search. If you are not on page 1 of the Google search, you've got work to do, right? So we told them that. So in 2011, in March, basically, Google, the biggest search engine, and others followed suit, of course, said, oh, guess what? You know, there are 425 million people on Facebook. There are 300 million people on YouTube. Obviously, those people are peer reviewers. What people do with your pages is important. If you make a page that's awesome and nobody shares it, you just really stink. So that is what the search engine said. They said off-page SEO, okay, we've got some things like links, but shares. It said social network shares are really important. And why? Because research historically, through time, says what is the number one way people trust information? Peer-to-peer recommendations. Peer-to-peer recommendations. So it does not matter if you are a .edu or a .org. If your best friend says this is the best piece of information I've ever received on how to grow strawberries, you're going to go there. And you're going to say to your other friend, oh, you should check that page out too. So it doesn't matter if you made the best page about strawberries, it was practically awesome, and you paid $10,000 to get the magazine. It is more important that your peers and other peers are going to those pages and sharing it. So that was a huge change in 2011. And people realized, oh my gosh, I've got to figure this out. This social media thing, it must be important because I'm no longer on the first page of Google, I'm on the 5th page of Google because nobody shares my site. They come to it, they find no relevance in sharing it. So those things began to matter. And so we looked at that and said, how are people going to find in the future? Well, guess what? Your statistics are important. You know, how long are people staying on your page? How many people are going there? How many people are sharing it? You know, is it even socially shared? Is it going to show up on the networks? We really feel like that's going to be even more important as it goes along. And it wasn't recommended by a user. You've seen, how many of you shopping on Amazon? Okay, how many of you are addicted to the stars? You're like, 5 stars? That's the best product ever, right? And that is the page recommending. It's going to start seeing there, I don't know if you've seen if you use Google, the +1. Anybody seen the +1? Okay, that's a recommendation. You're saying, I found this very valuable, I'm +1ing, I'm upping it, right? You're giving it a thumbs up. The timeliness of the information, if you think, oh, I built my website 5 years ago and I've never updated anything on it ever. Well, guess what? The less timely you are, the less relevant you are. And then how many of your particular friends visited this? This is the Web 3.0 coming into action. Not only does it know who you are, but because you're a social network, it knows who your friends are. And when it shows that your friends are recommending things, well, it's going to even give you more recommendations. So what does that mean when you're not using it for personal use? That means that you've got to figure out how your organizations and your entities can establish relationships with people, like real humans. You've got to figure out how to establish these things. And you've got to understand that these are going to be how you're found. And if you think, well, people will still know how to find us, they'll Google it. They may know your name exactly, TCEQ, EPA. But believe me, when they want to go to your website, they're going to go to Google and they're going to type it in because they've got thousands of things to remember. And remembering the title of your .html is not going to be a priority to them. So the organizational challenge is, are the traditional ways that we've communicated information searchable? Because when we've got 4 billion searches going on, how do you search a TV program? How do you search a magazine article? How do you search a newspaper ad or any of those things? Does anybody have a way to search those? Table of contents, like on what? Is there a table of contents for episodes of Zombie Nation? Like, I want to find out who killed Kurt. How do I find that out?
Google it.
You Google it. So you go right back to the web, right? Because there's no place to find that. All right, so it's changing the ways that we even do, you know this, newspapers. The Wall Street Journal, biggest subscriber. Online, very different than the one you get printed. It knows this, and it's also looking at very different things. The other thing organizationally that we say is that's marketing's job. Social media is marketing's job. In some ways, that is somewhat slightly not even close to true. So, it is not marketing's job anymore. It's not something that you can assign to marketing, although that is the tendency of every single manager in an organization. They'll figure that out. Okay, well, one marketing person does not a social network make, right? One person is not a social network. So you've got to think about that. And you've got to decide, okay, it's time to sit down and really think about a strategy. And so I am going to concentrate on the rest of the part on strategy. And I'm not going to tell you today, Kevin mentioned that we have an entire course on this. Yes, so you are not going to get the entire course squeezed down in 35 minutes. So I'm just going to give you some basic strategy tips and think about how to do this. If you're an agency, an organization, or as an individual who's really concerned about this, or that's your job, or you want to make it your job because nobody else is going to do it, then you need to take a little bit more in-depth of a course on this. But for now, I think all of these things you can think about. These are things that you're going to be doing no matter what your role in your organization or agency is. Hey, some of this is something you will be thinking about since all of you raise your hands about transferring information. This is typically what we like to do. We like to take our personal why I am online and change that to why my business is online or my agency. But they're really two different things. And so if you approach it like the same way that you would approach social networking from a personal standpoint, you're going to find it's much harder to keep up than if you would approach it from a business standpoint. And the business that we are in is we want to be online because we want to be an influencer. You are passionate about potentially, how many of you are passionate about watersheds? And it's okay, your bosses probably aren't in this room. Okay, so most of you are passionate about watersheds. Some of you are just making a living. Some of you are hoping to move on to, I don't know, what else? Commercial design or something like that. The rest of you care. You're like, I care about watersheds. I want my watershed to be healthy. I want people to understand that. How many of you are passionate about watersheds? Okay, so one of you raise your hands. All right, so specifically, that is one of you who are passionate about. So what you need to do is think, how do I turn that passion, that desire for information into something meaningful? Okay, let me just ask you this. Read this slide. Okay, how many of you would say that in general, you agree with one of these things? You think this is a problem? One of these things, okay. Two of these things, you think two of these things are a problem. Oh, some of you are still reading, hold on. Three of these things, how many of you say three of these things are a problem? Okay, how many of you say this is a huge, all four of these things are a major problem? I deal with this every day. Yes, I can completely see this. This is the biggest thing. Hey, nobody knows what a watershed is. We have spent years, and we, because I'm a rangeland scientist also, have spent years using the word watershed. But the reality is, I've spent 20 years in it, and I can still, even the people who have to listen to me all the time, who are my closest friends, like when I say, hey, you know, our watershed's in pretty good condition, they're like, oh, whatever. You know, and like, who's on the Super Bowl is really what they want to know. So, this is a major problem. And so when we talk about this, we are making major strides, or we think we're making major strides. But if I were to tell you that if you were to look at Google searches, do you think that in the history of Google searching, do you think watershed, the word watershed, would show up in the first 100 hits? He's laughing because he's like probably done it. He's like, you know, in popularity, 1.3 million, and that would be watershed. Because Britney Spears is kicking our butts, right? So this is the truth. So your challenge is to think about it in that way. What are you doing to make sure watersheds is getting up there? Are you being passionate about it online? Are you creating spaces where you're talking about watersheds? And I'm not talking about this. This is very typical of scientists. This is what we want to do. Like, I just want to puke out information to you, right? And this is what I'm doing all the time. Guess what today's, you know, load counts are? Hey, there's 7 million. Well, that's awesome. Like, you know. But what I really want as a consumer is contextual information. Today's load count is 7 million. Don't you dare drink that water. Don't know what Girardi is? Let me tell you. You know, that's the kind of, we're talking about information. And what people are looking for online is information. They're not looking for your data, although as a data person, I mean, I love data. But the reality is, in today's world, people are wanting contextualization. We've got to begin to say, our data, how come it's meaningful? What makes me want to read this publication? Why would I find it interesting? Okay, so we have to switch as scientists from this mode to this mode, and we've also got to do that on our websites. Huge, ow, especially if you're a national entity, this hurts badly, very badly. So, and as a matter of fact, you probably felt this morning, you said, I don't know where you're going to find that on our site, you'll just have to use the search engine, right? Because we're in the business of information, we're in the business of data. So that's okay. I mean, I'm from an estate agency, I know how that feels. So this is the biggest challenge. If I were to interview you, I would probably find out of these, 4 out of 5 probably existed in your organization. This one, you can raise your hand very slightly if you know it's true. Tightly controlled information. We are still in the era where people are like, I gotta be the editor for everything. I want to tightly control information. And so when they say, I don't really want you sharing information unless it has a huge disclaimer on the bottom. The views represented here may be the only opinions of myself and expressed and not applicable to my agency, organization, or religious organization in any way, mean or source. Okay, they want that information. Okay, few information outlets. Like, they don't want to invest in any information outlets because it's marketing's job. So we really need to leave it to 1 or 2 few marketing ones because they do it best. Management doesn't grant permission for free sharing of information to non-management because you don't want somebody on the low total pole sharing information when we're the ones that really know what's going on. Okay, so that's an issue. And reliance on existing relationships. I'm in an agency who does that. We say, well, we've got these great existing relationships. Okay, there are how many millions of people in Texas? How many are your clients? How many do you wish were your clients? So having a reliance on these existing relationships is taking you down a really deep rabbit hole, okay? And then discounting these non-traditional clients. There are people who have never heard of water quality, and we discount them. We say, oh, well, they're just not interested. That's not necessarily true. They're interested, they just don't know they're interested. And it's our job to find out the hook, to find these non-traditional clients. And we oftentimes talk about that I have read like 1,000 grants that come through, and they're all about, I'm going to reach people that we don't reach before. No plan. They just say they're going to do it. But then they write the plan, and it's the traditional ways. We're going to hold events. We're going to put it in the local newspaper. Well, we've been doing that. We've been doing that for 30 years, right? So are we getting the other 7 million people that we wish we had? We're not still reaching them. So how many of you have increased your numbers in the last 10 years tenfold? Nobody. But we need to do that if we're going to talk about real watershed sustainability, right? We have got to raise the bar. And we've also got to talk about the fact that we need to have measures of this that aren't traditional. Okay? We keep seeing the same things in grants and all the things that say, you have to keep doing the things the way you have been doing. And they don't give us a lot of leverage in doing non-traditional client outreach. So my recommendation to you, and this is what I was talking about before, is do them, report them, explain them, and then challenge those agencies to tell you that that's wrong. So create new ways of outreach, create new roads, report them, give the discussion on it, and then tell them you can't have them give you feedback that says you can't do that. That's not a good way to outreach. That's the only way we're going to innovate in some areas. It's just, that is a normal way of things. You've just got to try it out and do it. Okay, so what strategies could you now, you as an individual, organization, agency, from whatever level you're coming from, we've got very top level to very man in the field here, but all of us can implement some pretty important strategies. This one will make you happy. You don't have to actually be involved in a social network to reap the benefits of social media. So this, for those of you who are like, oh, I know it's coming, this will make you feel better. You don't actually have to do that. You just have to make sure that you are socially shareable in the spaces that you are in. If you are a blogger, if you are a website administrator, if you're contributing a news article to your agencies, you just need to make sure that whatever you have on the web is social media ready. And what does that mean? It's not terribly hard. You can just influence these best practices. Okay, so what about pictures on your articles? If you write a news release, if you write an article, if you write anything that goes on the web that you want to be shared, put a picture in it. Why? Because how many of you are Facebook users? Okay, when you type a link in Facebook, it gives you an image and text, right? That's the way things are socially shared. Why does it do that? Because research, we know this, 82% visual. Facebook makes a living on the fact that people share information. So of course it's going to use the tool that most humans use all their lives, their eyeballs. So if you have, I love it, when I have a news release that I'm so excited about that's put out by U.S. Fish and Wildlife, no picture. Like they have these really cool species they've found, they discovered, or they have an impact report on. And I go to share it and it's text. Could they have, I know they have an archive of like 10 billion pictures. Could they not have put one picture up there? Right? So we've lived in the social environment for a long time. If you are a writer, how many of you write something that's going to be posted? Sent out on an email, whatever. Okay, put a picture with it. I think you could find one. Okay, that's the number one thing. The other thing is practicing good writing skills. Surprisingly, writing for the web is not like writing for print. Okay, so because the way people read the web, this is how you read print. And if you look at research, it shows you how people read when they look downward. When people read for the web, they actually are physically reading differently. And so look up how that works. Okay? How do people read for the web? I'll just give you an example. People read in a Z formation. So if people are reading, they're scanning the information. They see a picture over here or over here. They're differently, actually functionally looking upwards in a different way. So this is why that's important. Also, what's also important? That first paragraph. Right? You do not want to scroll 10 times to get down to the important information. Put it in the first paragraph. Use bolding. Bolding's okay in the web. These are all things that are very different than print writing. So you just learn those characteristics. There's lots of information about that. Websites, I love websites that are full of PDF because they are entirely not searchable through search engines. So you spent years and years and years collecting PDFs, and I go to your site. Well, actually, I can't go to your site because I can't search the PDFs. So I may never ever get there on the years and years you've done PDFs. If you are going to put PDFs or anything that is not searchable through a search engine, make sure you have a good summary paragraph with every single PDF. Because right now, the search engines are not able to read PDFs, and we have lots of those great ones out there, right? Because we're all moving toward ebooks. So we're all thinking about PDFs. We're all thinking about e-readers. We're thinking about these things. We're not functionally taking advantage of them.
I guess could you include some of that information like metadata, or would that not work?
You could, but the search engines are really looking for that context in the first paragraph. The what they have, we got dinged, I guess, we found out people were getting dinged in about 2010 for squeezing those metadata tags, putting an entire paper in the metadata tag. And so when that happened, the search engines actually ignored the metadata tags completely. So that's a problem. I'll tell you what else the search engines don't like is duplicate content. If you're posting something that's been printed somewhere else electronically, don't copy and paste it onto your site. Lead people to the source of that information, because duplicate content is a no-no, because what happened is some people take that duplicate content, and in order to get higher in the search engines, they published it on 20 different sites, thinking, oh, it'll look like I'm getting published everywhere. Search engine people are smart. They figured that out. What they want is your relationship, your source of information. You actually get more points for leading back to the source of an information than republishing. So your website, if it's in a relationship with other authoritative websites, all of you in this room would benefit from linking to each other's website, because you're granting that you're good, you didn't depend on yourself, you got out there and you made a network of resources, a network of websites, and at the same time you said, we are strengthening others by lending basically your approval to those sites. So having these relationships in the web, you being part of other authoritative sites, lends credibility to your content. And most people think, oh my gosh, I don't want to see anybody else's logo on there. God forbid I should link another agency, to each other. But the truth is, when someone searches for blueberries and they come up with 50 websites on blueberries and they're all .edus or .orgs, how is Google going to know? It's going to go down to second tier. It's going to say, wow, maybe these two sites, Alabama and Texas, are linking to each other. They must have some credibility going on, and they're going to push it up. All this SEO stuff, all this stuff is a whole science in itself, but it's going on. And your ability to create social networking among yourselves is going to raise the credibility of your organization more than you could do yourself. Because remember, what SEO is looking for is peer-to-peer approval. And so, peer-to-peer approval of websites, peer-to-peer social sharing, all of this is a lot more important than it ever was a year and a half ago. So understanding that is also important. You don't have to be in those spaces, but you have to understand that you have to establish some kind of networking in order for people to find you and know that there's a relationship, because the web is getting smarter, and its job is to help the user find information. That's its job. So think mobile. Okay, this is a huge thing in 2012. Okay? How many of you have smartphones? Just hold them up, or your hand up, it doesn't matter. Okay, how many of you still have a clamshell? How many of you have gone in a store and looked and to see that the clamshell data plan is like twice as expensive? Your clamshell used to be the phone they gave away. Now it's the phone you got to pay for, because they're not going to support you anymore, right? So that's the reality. You're sadly shaking your hand. You know it's coming, right?
I really want to change, and I go in there and I'm so embarrassed when they start talking to me that I just turn and leave.
I just order online. You never have to talk to anybody. It just shows up at your door and you're like, hey, I'm smart. Right? So, yes, think mobile. We've all got to be thinking mobile. Why? Because this is what's going on. How are smartphones being used? How many of you text message rather than call people? Yeah, I do, completely. I have a basketball team, first and second graders that I do. I have not called their parents once. We text all the time. That's just how it's done. Thank God. But there are, this is how people are using it, and this is only going to increase. This man, you ever have some interest in mobile, if you are from an organization or an entity, or you have any influence remotely over your websites or your thought process of websites or information sharing, I don't care what it is, this man you must listen to. You must send them to him. He explains this in very, very good language, what we're looking at. So mobile phone use and tablet, we're talking about non-desktop. When we're talking mobile, I'm talking about non-desktop. I could be talking about tablets or anything that connects kind of through a cellular. This is really interesting, but in reality, how many desks, I have, at my home, I have 4 desktops. That includes laptops and desktops, right? So we're a family of 5, there are 5 of us. And mobile devices, we have 8. Right? And that's because I have only one 14-year-old, the other one's 11, and the other one's 8. So we really have a lot more capacity to build in our mobile devices. We will be building them. We have iPads, we have Kindles, we have smartphones, we have whatever. That is the world. So for every 5 of us who should be making 1 connection realistically, we already have double that in our house. So when you think of the capacity, this is what Luke Grabowski says. This is the capacity to reach, is the global addressable population is 4.7 billion people. And for people who don't have, they're not going to have anything. So we continue to have people say, well, there are some people who don't have a mobile device. Yes, but they are also going to have nothing else too. Third world countries, they have more mobile devices, and they receive that information, more mobile devices than we do. You can go to a third world country and find a farmer who's receiving his rainfall report through his mobile device, right? He doesn't even have a desktop, he has a clamshell phone. But he will be upgrading to a smartphone relatively soon. You will too. So, this is the reality, is now we're thinking, should you design for mobile first? So, that's something to think about. I'm not even going to go into, but that is a huge thing to look at, and in 2013 we are really going to be addressing that. If you go, and a good example of this, just so you can see, Southwest Airlines, go to their desktop site, and then load that onto your mobile site. It's not an app. It's just a native HTML. It looks completely different. Why? Because mobile users use websites different mobile. If you have 10,000 things they can do on the desktop, that's great, because people on a desktop have time to do that. If you're Southwest Airlines, all people are doing is looking up their flight times, can I get a cheap flight, and they want to hear the ding, right? So that's what they're doing, and that's what's on their website. That's what's on our mobile sites. We should start thinking about that, because the mobile connections will far exceed the desktop connections. It is very probable that there will be 3 mobile connections for every single human on this earth in the next 3 years. 3. So that is huge, just to think about. Okay, tip number 3. Most of you are saying, well, where should I start? Well, you shouldn't start anywhere. You should start with a strategy. Because really, this is I love how this is explained. This is the internet in donuts. And you should find out what Dunkin' Donut you want to be. Okay? Because this is how you can spend your time. Everybody says, well, should I just go to Facebook because most users are there? My recommendation is no. If you are not going to be a really good Facebook user, don't. If your agency loves pictures, if you want to interact with your client through pictures, and there are lots of agencies that do, then you want to choose Instagram or Pinterest, right? So this is really very meaningful. And you should think about your donut strategy when you're planning your social media outreach.
Can I Google that?
Yes. Actually, it's the social media explained through donuts. That's what you'll Google. And if you Pinterest it, you'll come up with a couple of different. The original guy wrote it out. I just thought that was cute. How many of you know that Pinterest is the #1 social network from last year? Okay. It grew more than any social network in 1 year. Any social network in 1 year of Pinterest. And why? Because I already gave you the statistic, 82% of the population are visual learners. Just throwing that out there. So, be specific. When you set up your social media goals, even for yourself and your particular educational program, be very specific about what you want. Okay, if I want more people to show up at my meetings, like that is my goal because I've got to report that somewhere, there's more of these time and contact hours. I'm extension, I report time and contact hours all day long. if I want more people to show up on my meetings, events, and newsletter, if that's my goal, because that's what's important to my program, pick a social media tool that will help you get to that goal. You need something that will announce your events, put it on people's calendars, these kind of things, and there are social media tools that will do that. It'll send them a mobile reminder. There are all kinds of things. If that's your goal, be specific and pick the social media tool that you want. Do you want to drive people to your website? Maybe your website is where it's at. This is where your stuff is. Well, how are you going to get people to go there? Having a website address assumes a relationship exists already with those people. We've already said that most of us would like to have a larger relationship with people that don't already come to our places. So what are we going to do? If I have a Facebook site, I'm going to say, hey, did you read our new article on, poo in the water? And I'm going to point it to my website, because I'm going to send them to my website. If I'm blogging about it, I'm going to send them to my website. You're going to use your other social media places to send them to the most important resource. If you're making a publication, maybe you just published something, you're going to put it out there. You're going to talk about it on your Facebook. But the publication, you're not going to repost the publication on Facebook. You're going to send them to your website, because you want them to establish this relationship between your social media and where you want them to be. Now, some of you say, well, I don't even need a website. That might be true, because most people are searching, and we have huge numbers of populations on Facebook, on Twitter, or whatever. Maybe that's the place you have your website. Okay? That's where people connect with you. That is very realistic in today's time, because a lot of people have social media content. How many of you actually have talked to somebody who's like 18 or 17? Okay, they're not browsing. They're having everything come to them. Ding, 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 ding. You hear their phone ringing off. It's because they're getting notifications about things that are posted to them. They're not necessarily using the web the same way we are. Okay? They're having things delivered to them. And that will be the way of the future. When a piece of information comes up that's your interest area, if something is published about watersheds in the future, this is Web 4.0, it's going to come to you. It's going to be delivered to you. You don't have to go to Google to search it out. And that is already starting. So those things you keep in mind. And also, you might just, and we do this on one of our websites, we use Twitter strictly to enhance the look of our website, because it's a feed. And it makes the website more relevant and timely. It has all these links. I don't have to go to my systems administrator every day and be like, can you update this link to go here and say this? I'll just put the Twitter feed on there. Twitter feed leads to a source. That's a great way to enhance your website. I told you that search engines look for timely information. They're looking for all these things in your website. So you may have a Twitter feed strictly to enhance your website. Okay, I think this is a guy you should look up. These are all really small, but if you look up Shawn Hardin, click Z, he has a great strategy in these 10 items. And you could sit down and hand write out what your strategy is. I don't care what your program is, big or small. You could sit down and write down all of these things, and by the end, you're going to figure out whether or not you need an investment in social media and what. And then you can either talk amongst yourselves or find somebody else. But this is the best one I've ever found, even though it's published in 2009. I think it's still an excellent strategy to begin your social media, even just thinking about it. Even if you're well versed in social media, you should go back to this and make sure that you are following some of these steps. Tip 4, Dunbar. Does anybody know what the Dunbar number? No, who has taken my courses before? Dunbar number. Okay, this is a scientific number. This is the number of meaningful relationships a human could have at any time in their life. And Dunbar says that the number of relationships that you can juggle in your life at any time, like right now, today, not over time, but today, that's 150. And that could be relationships with people. Maybe you subscribe to 7 magazines. That counts in your Dunbar number. Those are relationships with some information, some kind of feedback to you. So the Dunbar number is very important, because what you really need to ask yourselves in today's world, because people have a lot of choices about who to form relationships with. Okay, you have how many websites on watershed management or watersheds or healthy streams or watershed? How do you make sure that you are in the top 150 of any person? That's your goal. If you think, well, gosh, what do I have to sit down and do today to make my project a success? You need to make sure you're Dunbar. Okay, you've got to be in the top 150. And so how do you do that on social media? Whoops. Okay, you treat it like a relationship. You are not there to blast people with constant information. You're not going to be in their Dunbar because you're not a relationship. If you want to be in the Dunbar, which is what people want today, they want relationships. They're cutting out all the extraneous stuff. They want to be in a relationship. This is what they do. And I'm going to tell you right now, we have someone in this room who's excellent at this in their social media outreach. But this is what you do. You ask questions. You don't just say, here's the number. You might say, does anybody have a good idea? What conservation measures have worked for you? Okay? What's the best way you do to save water? What do you tell your community about pollution? Why not ask people? Because you are not the authority on everything. I mean, I think you are, but you probably aren't. And your constituents have some great ideas. And encouraging them to share that creates a relationship. When somebody asks you a question, do you feel valued? When I look in your eye and say, is this valuable to you? It makes you feel valued. Okay, we want to create that same feeling on social media. Organizations who don't do this do very poorly at social media because they turn people off. They're not good listeners. Who likes a poor listener? I'll jettison that friend right away. Okay? I don't want somebody that's talking about me all the time. I want them to ask, how are you doing? What do you think? Is this important to you? Don't be afraid to do that. And social media is a great place to do that. Provide context. This is a thing that I see quite a bit. A lot of times people say, hey, go read this link. And that would be because, there's no context. And people don't need to do that anymore. They've been doing that for 10 years. You've been sending the link to my email for 10 years. But now I don't want to read it until you give me a little reason why. Is it the best advice you've ever got? Is it how to cook spaghetti perfectly? I need to know because I don't have time to just go to a link anymore. I've got to have some context with it. And this also gives quality. Remember, peer-to-peer relationships are what important. If you value something, then you tell people you value it. That's why they should go to this homepage, or that's why they should care, or go to this link. You are a content provider. You're giving them quality information, and they need to know that. And you don't be afraid to show a little personality. We all make mistakes. We all have fun times. Don't be afraid to not do that on your social networks. People want humans. They want to know there's not some machine behind this entity or this organization. And this too, engage. You have to be willing to engage your audience and cultivate those relationships. You cannot put up a social media site and then ignore it. And then hope people come back and they have value to it. If you're going to take the time and effort to have a social media site, you need to make sure you are engaging. You're going to take the time it takes. Okay? Listen and follow to other good examples first. And I'm going to go ahead and give you two excellent examples. One is sitting right here in this room of a watershed organization that has done an excellent job in all areas of integrating social media into their entire outreach and education strategy. They didn't have a social media strategy, they had an outreach and education strategy in which social media played a good part. So it's about that, turning that into a strategy and what works. Trinity Waters is right here with Blake Aldridge. And Blake has been at it, a year and a half? Okay? And he has done an excellent job, I would have to say, of all the entities that I work with, one of the best, because he is constantly engaging people. He is talking to his audience. He's giving referrals. Hey, all of you in this room have probably got Blake has probably linked to something of your articles. How much time would you say you spend a day cultivating this?
An hour.
An hour. An hour out of an 8-hour day, and he gets a huge bang for his buck because out of the watershed organizations in a year and a half, people are talking about this one a lot. Okay? And some of us have been at this 20 years, and we still have yet to have someone talking about us. So this is a great strategy because it's not just about his social media. His social media drives things. It drives them to his resources, to his events, to your events, to publications from AgriLife, to publications from a national. It inspires people to be passionate. He asks questions. He has a guy who comments almost every day on every article that he ever writes. And that's a lot of time. If you think that guy, he's like waiting for Blake to post every morning at 8:10. Right? And then he's like, that's awesome. I like that picture. I go here. He's been a great volunteer. He's offered things you wouldn't believe. His personal place to stay, on his ranch. I mean, he has created this relationship by opening up this website. Go to Trinity Waters and look at his Facebook. You will see some great practices in there. Can't go over them all, but they are really, really good practices. Very personable. Well done sharing. He has photos on there. Does a great job. Okay, he also maintains other sites. This is just a few of them. And not, so he drives, what is important, he drives people to those sites. Come follow us on Twitter. Twitter's like this, you know, the bottom scrolling news. It's like these flash updates. Hey, the Scoop It is like a journal. It's like his personal magazine publication. So you can go to those all from his site. He's very consistent. He does good photos. He asks questions, does quizzes. He gives credit to other people. All the things that are good at social media. And so when you Google now Trinity River Basin, guess what? Trinity Waters is coming up top. Okay? He's doing all the things that need to drive people. But he's also inspiring learners. He's inspiring people to care about the Trinity River because he's creating a passion, and it's very evident in all these places. It's not boring. It's interesting. People want to engage. So I would say that's a great resource to look at. The other one is the Texas Land Conservancy. They're a conservancy organization, but they're also a little bit more artsy. They're inspiring people by stimulating the art impact of what their client is. Their client is a little bit different of a client, but you should go there and take a look. They are using Pinterest very highly because the photos that they take off the lands that they're protecting are very inspiring. You look at those photos and you feel passionate about the places they're protecting. So those are all ways that they're highly advocacy oriented, which is different than some of our organizations. We are all advocates, passionate, but maybe high advocacy may not be in our strategy. Okay, but that is in their strategy. And the other one is let others help. This is really hard, but if you are a manager, you have to realize that other people can share your information, and you should encourage them to. Your employees, if you're doing something great, encourage them, tell them, and train them on how to use their Facebooks or Twitters or Pinterest to share the good news. Right? You're just like they're just like a bunch of acolytes. You just train them. A lot of people skip this step. They say, oh, we don't need to train them. We need to tightly control information. Why not? Why not train them and let them help you? You need social sharing. You need other people. You can't be the only one sharing their information. That's not a social network. Okay? Set reasonable guidelines so employees know what tone to use. You know, be upbeat. You know, there's nothing wrong with writing in a guideline. Be upbeat. You know, be positive when you're promoting our organization. Be positive. You know, people will be negative, and you have to realize that's going to happen. That's just part of the information world. And this too, if you have volunteers and advocates, people who come to your trainings, hey, it would be directly say, it would be great if you posted that this is good on Facebook. We really need your help in promoting this stuff. Tell them what you want. Don't be so wishy-washy about pretending like you don't need advocates, right? We like to be like, oh, we don't want to tell anybody we need help. We might seem vulnerable, but it's not that way. A lot of people, you'll find your volunteers, like that guy, he's a huge advocate. And I think his sharing with other people, you don't have access. You have access to the people in your immediate circle. Okay, secondary circles, that is what the social network, that's the people you want to reach. But you have to reach them indirectly. You have to go through somebody. So you want to cultivate these secondary rings because that's the population, the non-traditional population that you don't normally reach. 200, and Blake has 207 likes, 207 fans on his page. His influence is 97,506 people. So for 200 likes, he's influencing 97,000 people. Huge return on investment. Okay, that's what social media does for you. It enables you to reach people because other people see what they liked, see what they shared, and they may be intrigued. They're like, I didn't know about that. And they might read that article too. It's just this continuing circle of information. You can't do that with email because you have no way to know, and it doesn't lead back to the original source. So those kind of things, your reach, are what's really different in social media than any other media that we have. Okay, and this is important too. If it's not working, kill it. If you try something and it didn't get you what, don't be afraid. Just close the channel down. You know, it may not be working for you, so kill it. Nothing shameful about that. Don't stretch yourself too thin and think you have to be everywhere at once. Pick one tool, do it really well. If you love Pinterest, I love Pinterest. If you love Pinterest, do it really well. Find out how to do it really well. You can pin articles all about, like nitrogen reduction. You can do it for yourself. How many times you browse the web and you find a good article and you're like, should I bookmark that? And then your bookmark list is this long, you know how to manage it. Pinterest is excellent for managing stuff like that. You would be surprised the study of Pinterest on what people pin. You don't even know, why would they repin the pin? Just is interesting to them. But it has an unbelievable educational outreach in Pinterest. We have a sample one going, and that is it just serves itself, right? So it's pretty interesting. Those kind of experiments really are working. So I'm just going to end with this. I want to challenge you, whatever stage you're at, whatever you're doing, think first about how people are connecting with you. That is where we need to figure out this thing. How are people connecting with you? If you don't have enough ways for people to connect with you, you will never grow your program, because we're not doing better than we traditionally have on our traditional connections, because the people are not there. The people are here, and we need to learn how to be there too. Okay, so, have any questions? You can ask Blake, who will answer any questions. And these are the other ways to connect with me. So, hopefully, I think, did we run over on time? 12:05. All right. If there's any questions, I can answer them real quick, or whatever y'all do.
I got one question. When's your next one-day training, and how can others get in contact with you for doing the full-day trainings, maybe for their organizations and so forth?
I think actually, if there was enough interest, it is much better to do a group of similar, like y'all watershed coordinators, because then we could address a lot of the same similar questions and similar issues. So if that was an interest, we could set up a training. It's a 9 to 3 training, and it could be longer, but we can set that up for y'all.
Okay.
Or us. Kevin and I work together, same institute. So.
What is your S?
That is Skype.
Oh, okay.
Yes. All right, any other, oh, one more.
Are there statistics, I mean, you talk about things growing and stuff. Do you have sort of a breakdown on urban and rural? I mean, you had the internet stuff, but what about, if you're thinking, well, should I be focusing on Facebook for my watershed, or should I be focusing on this? Is there some guidance for that?
For working with urban and rural audiences.
Well, just have statistics to sort of say, well, it seems to be Facebook is working better in this location with this demographic than Pinterest or that kind of thing.
We are getting better information on geolocation services, because we can now tell where people are when they access and the type of access they're doing. Statistically, though, urban and rural audiences' desire is limited by their broadband access. And so now that we have pretty good cellular and broadband access, that is decreasing even on an annual basis. So I would say, too, no, I think what you usually concentrate on is more a strategy. It's somewhat based on where your clients are. You may go out and say, how many of you would like to receive things by text or Facebook? I do that in face-to-face meetings with constituent groups that are specific. But the other strategy is that, what about focusing on that client you haven't reached yet? And I would say that as long as you're using socially shareable information, stuff on your website is linkable, or you're in a high social space, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or Pinterest, you have to rely a little bit more on the unknown public to spread your stuff. And I don't think there's a difference right now between urban and rural. If I'm working with a client group that I'm already very comfortable with, then I will ask them, do you prefer Facebook or whatever? But the reality is, I'm really interested in those people who I haven't reached yet, building new relationships. So I build my strategy on the desire to build new relationships, not existing ones, because I'm pretty good at that already. So did that answer kind of the questions? There's not that great a statistic. All we know is usage, and then what they might be using them for, email, Facebook, between urban and rural, but the line is really getting closer and closer now.
So it's the broadband issue, I mean, that is an issue for our area, and you find that out.
We know where broadband is, but the thing that's complicating it is cellular. Cellular coverage is expanding just, monthly. And so many more devices are connecting cellular than broadband. It's difficult now to even say the broadband issue is going to be there in a year. Now for streaming data, let's say you want to concentrate on YouTube, and you have a bad broadband access, cellular doesn't get you anywhere else either. So if your concentration is YouTube and you have a completely rural audience, you're going to have issues. You may want to go to something easier like Twitter, just text messaging.
Also, another tip that someone gave me recently is to have links to these social networks in your signature.
Yes. And the best thing you can do, I don't, we'll end with this because I want to send you on time, is QR codes. Have you heard of
Yeah.
those?
On the-
QR codes are scannable codes that contain lots of information. They look like those black and white squares of just, it looks like a kind of crazy picture. But you can put those on the back of your business cards, and what you do is you maintain the site that it sends people to. So you can update the site all the time. And you have all your information in there, your phone numbers, your contact, your websites, your Facebooks. So people just look at your business card and they take their smartphone, they scan it, and it takes them to the site, or it keeps an electronic business card. QR codes are really great. Each of our displays, our posters, should have QR codes because it's the most accessible way people can take information, besides just taking a picture, which I do. I take a lot of time to just take a picture of somebody's business card or something like that. If you haven't looked into QR codes as a way to reach information out, all your publications, if you're into the process of publication, you should look at QR codes for your agency or organization. That was a good point.
One more question.
Is the evolution of the cloud playing a role in how in social?
The ability to not be tied to a machine is going to be huge, and also the ability to transfer documents and things like that. We're seeing a huge pickup in the cloud. It's also becoming less like, you have stuff that's Apple ready and Google ready. The cloud is merging that. The biggest thing they're talking about in the cloud is crowdsourcing, trying to figure out how the stuff stored in the cloud is related to each other and then related to people, and putting people together with their cloud usage. So I think it's moving into that Web 4.0 area where when you click on a picture, right now when you click on a picture, it doesn't know what it is. It's not a passion flower, it's just a picture, because that's what it says in the HTML. But if you're looking at, if you just Google searched passion flower and then you click on a picture, the machine is starting to understand that the picture that you clicked on is a passion flower. And then it's going to begin to make a recommendation that you may see on the side that says, oh, here's some more information about passion flowers. And your friend, Bob, just purchased a passion flower from Native Landscapes of Texas. All of that is coming together, and a lot of that is managed in the cloud. There are a lot of steps. So.
Well, thank you so much, Amy.
Yes, you're welcome. I'm not turning that off.
Okay, lunch